Hello, everyone, and welcome to this education and outreach session organized by Jnana Prabodhini Foundation's analytics team. Today, we'll be talking about getting access to human data, that is, an introduction to data scraping. In previous sessions organized by JPF Analytics, we have walked through an overview of a simple data pipeline of how data analysis involves cleaning data, eventually transforming data, then doing the actual analysis, and finally visualizing that data. We have also in a previous session talked about how this simple data pipeline is incomplete, that there is towards the beginning, the crucial step of getting access to data or data scraping. And towards the end, there is the actual stage of communicating or disseminating your data to a broader public and actually taking decisions based on that data. In today's session, we will focus on the very first step, that is, how does one get access to data? This is just one of multiple sessions that will be focusing on data scraping or data acquisition. So let us begin with the question that we have at hand. How does one get access to human data? And we can motivate the answer to this question with a real-world case study or real-world example. Many of you may be aware that very recently, last month, in fact, India overtook China to become the world's largest population, the world's most populous country. Today, India has a population of over 142 crore people, growing by every second. By the end of this session, a healthy number of people would have been added to this number. And this has many consequences in the real world. But before we jump to those consequences, it's worth knowing where this number came from. Well, this number was put forth by the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, that is DESA, and they came up with an estimate of what India's and China's population would be today, as well as projections of how these populations would change in the future. So it is important to emphasize that these numbers are just estimates of today and projections for the future. And you might ask yourself, how did the United Nations come up with this estimate and come up with these projections about population size? Well, the United Nations in this context use multiple types of data, including fertility, mortality data, and internal migration, obtained from a variety of sources such as vital records, surveys, and administrative data. So just to give you an example of what that would be, this is the fertility data that the United Nations used. And fertility, as all of us may be aware, is just the number of children, number of per woman, number of births per woman that happen in a country. And that has been steadily declining in India and China over the past few decades. And it was these trends in fertility rate that the United Nations used to inform their estimate about the population of India. Similarly, there are mortality rates, and mortality rates directly affect the proportion of the population belonging to a certain age group. So these mortality rates also tell us about the expected demographic trends, both in the past and in the future. And it was these figures, these estimates that the United Nations used to come up with the number of the population of India today. It is worth saying that accurate data about population is really important. It has important policy implications. As we currently alluded to, the number of people belonging to different population age groups has vital consequences for the economic and health profile of a country. For example, the number of people within the 25 to 64 age group is then the total working population of a country. That has direct impacts on metrics like GDP. Other aspects such as the proportion of population above the age of 65 has important consequences in terms of public health, neurocognitive and developmental disorders such as dementia, and a host of other socioeconomic institutions such as old age care homes, retirement pensions, and social security. So I don't think we need to belabor the point of how important it is to just know how many people live in some place. And then you might be wondering that, why were these estimates necessary? Why were we estimating and projecting? Why not simply count how many people are out there? Well, that's a very legitimate question, and that's a very valid question. And The answer is that we do count people. There is a whole class of data collection, human data collection, arguably one of the most basic types of data collection in the computational social science, that are censuses. And censuses are simply enumerating the number of people that live in a country or live in a certain geographical area. And India has had multiple censuses in the past, beginning in the British times. They have been conducted every 10 years. They were also conducted in the Second World War, as you can see. However, India has not had a census recently. The last census India conducted was in 2011. So that is, like over 12 years ago. And the next census in India is expected to be in 2024, or maybe even after that. And Then you might wonder to yourself, why is there no census being conducted? What might be reasons explaining why uh, counting people is so difficult? Well, it is an intensive exercise. These are numbers from estimates from 2020, and clearly the census did not happen in 2021, but it is estimated that the census of India would cost, anywhere above $10 billion. For context, the US census costs about $14 billion. It is a hugely labor intensive process, and therefore it's not an easy thing to do. So there may be genuine reasons why conducting a census, not just in India, but anywhere else in the world, is just not possible, which is why, as we will see in this session and in other sessions, is that even though censuses do represent the gold standard of data, of socioeconomic data, oftentimes censuses are not what people rely on. Instead, people rely on randomly sampled representative surveys. Those surveys only represent a subset of the population, not the entire population. And they have their own drawbacks, which we will come to see in the future. For now, though, we realize that one limitation of censuses is their resource intensivity. Not just is conducting a census intensive, but disseminating the data of a census is also intensive. So today, if you wish to access the data from the Indian census, you can go to the Office of the Registrar General and the Census Commissioner of India. And luckily for us today, a lot of this data has been converted into Excel sheets, in the sense it has been digitized. But for up till very recently, and even today, you can see some other government sources of data tend to be, things like scanned PDFs, where the data may not be digitized soon enough. Oftentimes, census data in India and in other places in the world is released after anywhere between 1 to 2 years after the actual census has been conducted. So there is a lag in the dissemination of this data. However, it is very important to conduct this data, not just for informing the future, policy implications for the future, but also telling us about the past. And in future sessions, we will talk about another method of getting insights about human data, specifically human population data, that is not a census and not a survey, but rather relies on historical methods. So they are not prospective projections that we saw towards the beginning of this session from the United Nations, but they are retrospective projections about how populations might have been in the past. Suffice to say, it is very difficult to get access to human data, even something as simple as how many humans reside in a certain geographical area. However, in the remaining portion of this session, we will hope to give you some examples of data sources where you can readily get access to this data. This is not meant to be a comprehensive session, but we will just give you an example of some of the sources that you could use. Um, Whereas we did focus on population data, in the example today, we have talked in previous sessions that human data spans many different and diverse social scientific domains. So the data is not just about how many humans are alive, can be about many other things. And it is especially important in the context of computational social science to actually have access to data and not rely on personal anecdotes or real world lived experiences, though they are important sources of data. As a computational social scientist, as a field, having access to rigorous large scale data sets is more important. As we have mentioned, getting access to human data is tricky for a variety of reasons, not the very least as being resource intensive. So there's time, money, and human personnel that we have touched upon. But it is also the fact that storing this data requires robust data infrastructures. And without those data infrastructures and those data cultures, having robust human data becomes very difficult. However, within human data in particular, there are some context specific constraints that we have touched upon and we will continue to touch the future. There are human bureaucratic elements, such as even if the data getting access to that data might present some barriers that we will briefly touch upon. But more importantly, something that will probably take a whole session to cover is that humans themselves, when you ask them questions, uh, possess a whole range of cognitive biases. They may not be willing to provide a surveyor with the correct answer. There may be social desirability at play, and accounting for all of these biases and inaccuracies that may creep into your data set is something that is to be very cognizant about when you're thinking about human data. Um, but so let's jump now into examples of some sources where you can get access to such data. Um, a lot of this data is piggybacking off the data revolution that we have discussed extensively in previous sessions, that allows us to get access from the large number of humans that are increasingly coming online. So as we have mentioned, India's census data today is completely digitized, and you can access it all on censusindia.gov.in, and you can go and download a range of different tables out there. As you can see, that you can also zoom into specific data sets. So there is age, there's decadal variable in population, there is disabilities, and this is only going up to the letter D. So you should go and explore and play around with these data sets. There's a lot of rich data out there, which is conveniently in a cleaned format. The focus of today's session is not data cleaning, but data scraping. But luckily for us, a lot of this data is in a clean format. So it is immediately available for one to analyze. Um, and the census of India's data is arguably one of the best sources of human socioeconomic data, not just in India, but given the size of it, anywhere in the world, especially data sets from more recent years. Um, what else apart from India's census data can we access? Well, another important premier data forum, again coming from the government of India, is simply data.gov.in. This is again an extensive data set which has more than 500,000 resources. That is more than 6 lakh resources. More than 32 million people have already downloaded it. So it really goes to emphasize that these are not just data sets that are sitting out there on the web, but actual humans are going and accessing and using those data sets. And that's, I think, a really important component of creating a data culture and a data informed lay citizenry. Every day, as you can see over there, they highlight different data sets. So I believe currently the data sets that are being highlighted are from the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation and Commerce. So you see in front of you an example of a visualization of the renewable energy capacity across different states in India. But this is just one example of the different data sets that are available on data.gov.in. Right in front of us, we are seeing, there's data about crime, there's data about rainfall, about population, about the markets, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. Of course, this is a data set that focuses on India, and more importantly, it has low granularity, in the sense it's a very zoomed out data set, and it is only focusing on India. Another such class of zoomed out data sets that are not just restricted to India come from Our World in Data. Our World in Data is, again, arguably one of the best sources of aggregated sources of global data that takes data from a variety of institutions such as the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organizations, the United Nations, a bunch of national and regional censuses and local surveys. And here you see an example, which is the Global Health Data Explorer. So this is an example of child mortality data set. And I should give the caveat that all of the maps and the geographical territories and boundaries that we show in these sessions are not some that we bear responsibility to. And we do subscribe to the official geographical boundaries as put forth by the government of India. But beyond uh, just child mortality, there are many different other indicators that you could go on Our World in Data, and just go down to this drop down and play around with them. You can also, as you can see down here below, download the raw data sets and the raw CSVs of these files. So not just interact with these visualizations, but actually use them to answer some kind of question or hypothesis that you may have. All of these are extremely high granularity data sets, as I mentioned, both the Indian government sources that have mentioned and this one by Our World in Data. But even if you're focusing on, if you're interested in more zoomed in data sets, more high granularity data sets that focus on local insights, there are also increasingly options like that out there. So many cities in India and across the world have what are called open data stores. So the Pune government, so the Pune Municipal Corporation specifically, in collaboration with the Indian government's Digital India Initiative and the Smart City Initiative, have this Pune data store where you can go, anyone can go and download a variety of data sets. Jnanaprabodhini Foundation's analytics team has been downloading, cleaning, and visualizing some of these data sets as part of our interactive geospatial portal, which you can access on jnanaprabodhinifoundation.org/COVID survey -results. So you can see here an example of the unemployment rate in Pune, in the Pune Municipal Corporation, and that data set was obtained from Pune government's data store. And there are a variety of data sets here, ranging from Pune's tree census to diseases in Pune, to the water resources in Pune, to the infrastructure of Pune, as in the sewages in Pune, the roads in Pune, the informal versus formal settlements in Pune. There's hundreds of data sets. Again, depending on your question, you would want to go there, download them, and work with them. I should also mention that apart from these open data platforms where you can easily go and download data sources, data sets. There are also these central hubs, or in the context of India, what are called knowledge and innovation clusters, that have been established by the office of the principal scientific advisor to the government of India. These are nodal hubs that have access to high quality proprietary data sets. So in the context of Pune, they have access to data about healthcare, about sustainability and environment, about sustainable mobility, about high-skilled human resources, so that's broadly capacity building, and about the data infrastructure of Pune. So these nodal hubs as well are places where citizens can go and try to access data, and they are very receptive to sharing data, of course, with the necessary standards of data privacy and data sharing. As we've talked about this before, and it bears warrant mentioning in the context of these nodal hubs like the Pune Knowledge Cluster, that oftentimes getting access to such data may not be necessarily straightforward. There may be a series of bureaucratic loops and steps that you have to constantly navigate. However, the situation is changing, and over time, this complex web of actors and stakeholders that one needs to navigate if one needs to get access to human data as a computational social scientist is getting streamlined. However, it is worth noting that this complex web does exist, and therefore getting access to human data, as we have talked about in previous sessions, does tap into one's core competencies as a computational social scientist, specifically being able to engage and communicate with a wide range of stakeholders like think tanks, media, nonprofits, academia, industry, and government sectors, because these are sectors that often have access to different types of human data. And dealing with these sectors might require different norms of operation, different standard operating processes, but you would have to navigate all of these differently depending on what data you want to get access to. We do not have time for today's session to focus on other types of data, but I should just briefly mention as we end that these traditional methods of data gathering that we covered today, which primarily include censuses and surveys, can often be complemented and supplemented using modern methods. And we have discussed that in previous sessions before conducted by JPF Analytics. So unemployment data that is typically gathered using large-scale surveys can be complemented using mobility data obtained from GPS that comes from your mobile phones. Similarly, earthquake data that is typically gathered using, high quality seismographic techniques can also be complemented using real-time insights from Twitter and other social media that humans are providing. Crowdsourcing can help supplement a lot of natural disaster early warning, prediction, and detection systems. Finally, diseases and public health related data, which is typically gathered using door-to-door surveys, can also be complemented using modern data sources such as contact tracing that are digital avenues. And therefore, in future sessions that focus specifically on data scraping, we would be discussing what are ways that a computational social scientist can leverage their computational competencies to get access to these types of non-traditional digital data, which are typically found data in the sense they're found online. They are not necessarily curated or sought after beforehand in a systematic manner. They just exist out there, and you find them and you have to effectively mine them. So we'll be discussing these in a future session on data scraping. And if you don't want to wait for that session, if you want to get cracking by yourself, this is a good resource that I would recommend, that we would recommend. It's a good book called Big Data and Social Science, which gives you a list of how you can use a lot of practical tools, primarily from R and Python, that can allow you to just get cracking and actually implement whatever data scraping pipeline that you have in mind in the context of computational social science. So with that, we will end this session about data scraping. And as we have said, just getting access to this data, scraping this data is indeed just the first step. And today's session is just the first session about data scraping. And in future sessions, we will go into more details about getting access to data in our future sessions on Introduction to Data Scraping, organized by Jnana Prabodhini Foundation's analytics team. We hope to see you next time. Thank you.